Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome again from me as well. I mean, what a cool venue. I mean, we haven't even done any of the good Game of Thrones stuff, and people are excited. I was here a little bit earlier yesterday setting things up, and I was sitting in the cafe, which is actually here, and the theme tune was going on. And really, obviously, being in an Irish area, the really nice lady came up and said, excuse me, are you all okay? Is the music not annoying you? And I said, no, the music is amazing. I've been listening to it for 2 hours. It's been going on and on. But it was actually anxiety driving. I felt myself getting anxious. I was about to turn around thinking, who's going to do something to me on top of my head? So hopefully that's not going to be our experience here today. But yeah, I also want to say, welcome to everybody over here. And I think we've got a fantastic bunch of speakers who are going to come up, coming after me. I'm certainly not the one who's going to say I'm going to be fantastic. That's for you to judge. But also, this is a community event, and I really want to stress the community part of it. We're in person after COVID. Everyone's here together. And just a quick show of hands, who would see themselves as exploring the world of serverless? You don't quite know what it is. You're thinking this is a bit weird. Game of Thrones has been a cool attraction to come to. Oh, tough crowd. Okay, anybody experts on serverless? In fact, you should be taking over all of our jobs. Tough crowd. Okay, we're going to have to work with you today. So basically, there are going to be people in your room. My point is that who really don't know all trying to discover what serverless is and trying to work it all out, and they're going to be people that are experts. So I encourage you to speak to each other. It's going to be a tough crowd. You are IT people. You may have to talk to other humans. I know it's going to be hard. But yeah, I do encourage you to really make this a community event and find out the experts, either the experts or even the people in the same situation as you who have not done this before, and learn from each other. So the question we're sort of starting off with this whole day today is serverless a reality or a fantasy? And maybe the question you're thinking in the back of your mind, is serverless a fad or it is the future? So Dave has kindly introduced me. I'm Julian. I have worked in AWS for 3 and a bit years. One of my first sort of outings with AWS was actually coming to Liberty IT in Belfast to talk about serverless. But yeah, my background is actually from infrastructure. I was the person racking, stacking switches and installing and patching operating systems and handling all of the ridiculously complex networking that enterprises had. And when the serverless thing came along, that just light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, all of that stuff I was doing, I could get rid of it. It paid well. I wasn't as well paid as a COBOL developer, but it paid well, but I just knew that wasn't going to be the future. So I will admit I am maybe a little bit biased, but hopefully I'm going to take you through some of my thought process. Because every business wants to please your customers. You want to understand your customers' needs. You want to get it to get it fast. In my previous thing, that involved ordering a server and waiting for 2 months, and just taking forever to get things up. Phil's McDonald's kind of thing. Can you imagine without being in the cloud of trying to set up anything to do home delivery? I mean, that would take years, and that's just from the infrastructure build out. And so the whole point is to try and meet your customer needs and to do that faster. And you want to create that flywheel of being able to be faster, to do more innovation. And it's not just doing things faster. You want to also do things better and safer and cheaper, and to accelerate that time to value. Because the big picture is the faster that you can experiment, the better. Because you can try things out. You are going to fail, but if you can try often, it's going to be much quicker to be able to innovate. But if you are thinking, well, you are in the beginning kind of thing, serverless adoption is growing super fast. Now, Lambda is one of our serverless services. There are going to be many others, but I mean, we have more than 1 million customers using Lambda every month, and sort of 10 trillion Lambda invokes per month. So I mean, that's just on Lambda. Lambda's going gangbusters. And customers are building, a whole variety of kind of things. So don't just think this is sort of small little proofs of concepts or throwing up something on the cloud. Some really huge, big, data processing, machine learning, and event-driven applications are being built with serverless tech on AWS. And literally, Liberty IT is one of the sort of foundational companies that have done this successfully. And they see the serverless mindset as a sort of whole benefit of serverless. And they can improve their agility and reduce their costs by having a sort of strategic and, what's interesting, a pragmatic approach to being serverless. They think of themselves as serverless first, but that's not necessarily serverless only. They're going to think of that as their default starting point for building applications, but things change. If a serverless service or application isn't going to be the best choice, well, then they're going to have a good reason not to go serverless, and they're going to pick something else. So it's a really pragmatic kind of choice. And I think it's incredible that Liberty is a local, well, slightly north over here, Belfast company, and really some of the pioneers in serverless. And a whole bunch of Liberty people I know are in the room here today. And Liberty alums literally wrote this book, and I'm not the one to gush about IT strategy and technology books, but this really is great. And Dave, and I know I saw Mark McCann earlier, I saw Michael O'Reilly earlier, they're here as well. There's Mark. Michael, are you around? Oh, right next to each other. They've taken the learnings of how you can do serverless at scale in an enterprise, and this isn't even a tech enterprise, it is now, but this is an insurance enterprise, and have some really actionable advice on how that you can run your business, from the two pizza teams and how you can map out your infrastructure and how you can map out your applications. Promise you, it's actually a really good book, and now I'm not just saying this because Dave invited me to speak today. Promise. And of course, it's available at all Amazon good Amazon bookstores to buy. So when we're talking about doing applications and everything, we also are talking about metrics, and we do want to sort of measure about how things are doing. And I do like the DORA metrics, because there are literally 4 metrics that you can see whether your business and whether your organization is being effective in using, in delivering software. And the top 2 are sort of how quickly can you deploy things, and also how long does it take from the time that you maybe commit something to a Git repo and that can actually get into production. And then the second 2 are the sort of change failure rate. How many of those changes fail, and then how long does it take time to restore that service. And there are 2 aspects to this that are important, the velocity aspect and the stability aspect. And yeah, it's really cool if you can deploy fast and your lead time to changes is really quick, but you then have to redo the work all the time. That's going to impact kind of things. And so these sort of things work together to be able to deliver things, to deliver your applications for your business. And it's important to sort of think of these metrics as we're talking. But the cool thing is there actually isn't a trade-off between the speed and the agility. Just realized I'm really standing close to the slides, and sorry for the people on the right-hand side, I may be blocking you. I don't want to walk up and down the slide, but anyway. Dave Farley of sort of massive DevOps fame said, there is no trade-off between having the speed of agility. And if you do want high speed, you must build high-quality systems. And then if you want high-quality systems, you must build them quickly as a series of small changes. And what's going to help with building quickly as a series of small changes? Well, a serverless approach is going to be really helpful for that. And serverless way, because you can abstract a whole bunch of that infrastructure and operations, allows you to build fast and to deploy really quickly. But also, because you have an operational aspect that you can, someone else can do, it gives you that stability. Someone else is looking after a lot of the stuff that can go wrong. And also, tied into a bit of the stability is a lower cost of ownership, because it's going to cost you less to be able to maintain the availability and reliability of your applications. The next thing just to think about is, a lot of people get sort of twisted about the whole definitions of serverless. And, I'm the first to admit that maybe some of the AWS products and services we have are on sort of various parts of the scale of serverless. And I sort of like people to think that serverless is not actually about having or not having servers. In fact, if you think about wireless, everyone's connected to the Wi-Fi, the wireless in this room. And when you're consuming that, you're not thinking about the wires. But behind the scenes, with wireless, there are a heck of a lot of wires. You just don't see them. They're sort of behind in the building. And so serverless is part of that. But serverless is also then not just only thinking about the code or the integrations or the cloud or the functions or the operation, reliability, and all the kind of scale. I like to think of serverless really as a mindset. And this is an approach, a practice, a way of thinking that you can deliver value for your organization. And that what serverless does, being able to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff, is give you focus. And that focus means you can really hone in on your business value, rather than the servers underneath or the enabling technologies. The benefits are clear, from things like prototype to production, and fast feedback loops, which helps you really iterate quickly for your business. And companies are doing this well, like Liberty IT and others, have this sort of serverless first mindset. And, with the simplicity part, the serverless strategy is about doing the simple thing to deliver value by to do stuff, consciously avoiding stuff you don't have to do. And a serverless-first approach is really helpful to do that. And so you can accelerate your time to markets, often with a serverless approach, by building smaller, simpler, loosely joined services and connecting them together, and you've got less undifferentiated heavy lifting to look after. But, serverless does require a new way of doing things. And, serverless is a reality, but the fantasy is it can often trip people up when they don't consider other kind of things. And the awesome Sheen, from Lego, who's going to be speaking later, does talk about how you need to think differently for serverless. It's about stateless and asynchronous, how you need to architect differently for serverless. Event-driven and microservices, building, you've got incremental builds with sort of an iterative build process, and operating, there's different observability and different metrics involved. But I want to just touch on the operational side, because that's part of the theme of here today about talking about what practitioners are going to be doing. And this is a Gartner survey from 2019, and I have no reason to think that it's any different. Sort of 80% of the developers' time spent on the ops and maintenance, and only 20% on doing any of the innovation. And I mean, that's a massive barrier. You're spending, there's a lack of time that you're spending on things that actually matter. And CIOs want the dev teams to focus on the innovation and do the things speedily, but today all the time is being spent on the operations and the maintenance. And obviously, we've been on this journey of sort of DevOps way, where sort of culture and an organizational change for collaboration. And the devs on the one side want to keep improving the product, and their goal is innovation. And on the other side, the operators, want to keep the product working, and their goal is low risk and high reliability. In fact, they don't want to make any changes, and that causes this sort of tension. But obviously, both are important. You want to innovate, but any downtime, you risk losing trust with your customers, and it's going to affect your business. But the operations role is now changing. And in a serverless way, when you're building serverless applications, your operations people are not so worried about the setup and the teardown of the infrastructure. This is just done automatically in the cloud with serverless. And so people often think, well, does serverless actually mean there's no operations? Well, with serverless, it's different. The operational management required to run and scale applications is handled for you by the cloud. And serverless just really makes it much easier in a DevOps model to bring the dev side and the operations side together. And it means that the operational side can actually be way more involved in the actual product development. And that sort of certainly means that DevOps is no way dead, but we are sort of fuzzing the line between the operations and the development, which is a good thing. Because it means you can explicitly avoid taking on operational tasks. And in fact, you consciously choose to outsource any of that operational size and outsource some of those admin tasks. And you want to think about every non-serverless component as something additional that you need to take on. And you can explicitly make a choice now to optimize for your long-term maintenance by going with a serverless approach. So then, what's going on? What does ops actually do then in a serverless world? Well, I think that the operators take on a more strategic role when they are building serverless applications. And no ops is certainly not a reality, and operations are actually more important than ever. But ops are going to be different, and the role is certainly not less important. But what happens is it becomes less manual. Instead of handcrafting all these kind of things and doing deployments on servers, it becomes more strategic. And they can actually take a wider role in the organization, which is super useful. And they can sort of take on a bigger role to establish and deploy some of the guardrails and some of the enabling things to enable your organization to operate safely and with speed in the cloud. And an organization that is doing this, for example, is Toyota. And when they do this well, they are just getting some really good cost savings. And Toyota Connected, they run this service called Mobility Services Platform. I knew I was going to get that the wrong way around. The Mobility Services Platform. And they're using a serverless compute platform to bring sort of valuable insights to their drivers. And using a serverless approach, they were able to reduce their cost of ownership by 70 to 80%. I mean, 70 to 80%, that's a massive change. But obviously, there are two approaches to operations when you're thinking about this. On one side, we've got the free-for-all. And I mean, no one's actually really considering this approach as something valid or something that you want to do. But this is where you can let your devs go as fast as they can, but obviously there's going to be bad code that's going to be put out there that's maybe going to affect your reliability, and maybe in a bad case, you're going to get legal issues kind of coming out of that. But on the other side, you've got everything which is centrally controlled. And this is when you have teams or a team who takes control, strong control of that release pipeline. They're the only ones who can provision the resources. They may be the only ones that can secure the applications. Maybe they're the only ones that land up doing troubleshooting. And certainly that is lower risk. But obviously it's going to be a lot slower because they're having to do everything in a sort of slow feedback loop. But what we really want to do is have it the best of both ways. We want to be fast, and also we want to be safe. And this is super useful because we want to also have a low risk to a business. And this is why we want to use the concept of guardrails. Now, guardrails are an interesting thing, which people talk about. Now, the sort of technical definition of here is, process or practices reduce the occurrence and blast radius of undesirable application behavior. You can see that's been written in a textbook somewhere. But what that generally means is that, you can have rules in your organization that protect your developers from things that can go wrong. And so you can detect potential issues before they can go into production. And these, it's not just necessarily code kind of stuff, but it's observability and cost optimization and security things, for example. So some practical things. Maybe a guardrail is going to be alerting on excessive permissions with Lambda functions when they're being created. Or if you haven't set up your logging and your tracing on an API gateway or some other kind of service, you can actually prevent deploying that in your pipeline. And from a cost management perspective, you want to set your log retention so you're not basically spending money needlessly in the cloud. So these are some of the guardrails. But the bigger picture is to have these things called enabling constraints. So you want to have some constraints in your application and into your architecture, because if your developer is just going to run wild, things are going to go wrong. But you want to be able to give your developers rapid development. They can do their things really quickly and give them a fast feedback loop that they can course correct and they can do things really quickly on a sort of paved path where they know what to do. And the best way to do this is sort of do this in code with best practices and standard components that can be reused. And one of the ways to do this is to have central teams that can look after this, but also do some crowdsourcing and get some of those coded best practices within your organizations, that your ops teams and your developers can be involved in the creation of all of these guardrails. And also, when we're talking about dev and ops, obviously we're talking about running on a platform. And there's a lot of talk in the industry what it means for a platform that this needs to run on. But if the cloud is the platform, do you actually need a platform team? And if you do DevOps, well, do you need a platform team? What is the role of a platform team? We're here on serverless days, so serverless, do you need a platform team? Well, as with DevOps, there's a people and process challenge that's really part of it. And the concept of platform engineering recognizes that giving dev teams full control over everything they're going to do is actually quite intimidating for them and actually super complex, because you do need governance in any organization that is going to be doing things seriously. And a lot of the operational and governance issues don't actually need to be surfaced to the developers. The developers want to get stuff done. They want to release things into production. They want to have that closely aligned dev and operations kind of thing. But they want self-service to help them out. They want great tooling to work with your operations. And so you absolutely want to get them on their way. But the question is how. And so it may be tempting to build your own platform. But I'm going to caution you that you need to think of the bigger picture, because a platform is a product. And any product, there are things you need to think of. Is this going to be something that's long-lived? Do you have a product management function, a marketing function? How are you telling the people who are going to consume this platform what it's going to be about? There's a whole bunch of other things that you really need to take seriously if you're going to build your own product. And even things like budgeting, things like projects are going to be budgeted for a short-term period, while our product needs ongoing funding. So, really good funding happens more for products rather than projects. So it's something you need to be careful of. So the job of a platform team should not be about building a platform. In your organization, it should be about enablement and enabling other platforms. And you probably then want to have many teams enabling many platforms that your devs can use. And these can be security platforms for authentication services maybe, or logging platforms, or tooling to integrate other kind of things. And then the platform teams can do their own outreach, so they can do their marketing function, they can do the tracking, they can find out exactly how their services are used within their organization, and also generate that fast feedback loop to be able to improve these small little platforms. And because otherwise a big platform can turn out to be a big silo, and it can be certainly an expensive one. And so the big idea is that any of these platforms that you're doing is to provide a curated experience for their builders so they can get on and do the job of the building, and you can handle a lot of the back-end stuff for them. So you want to enable things to happen and not be that central team that's just going to block things from happening. And some of these kind of cool platform enablement examples that work really well is that you can have central teams looking after maybe your CI/CD pipelines and how they work and the integrations with third-party systems. Some security guardrails so your developers can go and create their permissions, but there are service control policies or permission boundaries around that they can't stray too far, but they can still innovate quickly within that. Networking is a big thing. I think one of the biggest secrets of serverless is that it actually gets rid of a whole bunch of networking stuff from ingress, egress, and service meshes and all this kind of thing you just really don't need. But there is still a bunch of networking you need, and you need specialists to do that. So maybe you're going to have a platform network team that's going to look after some of your VPC connectivity. And the really important thing is using infrastructure as code and having it reusable and creating these patterns internally, be it from CDK or SAM or Serverless Framework or Terraform or whatever. And this is where your operations people and your dev people can work together to build these patterns that you can then use in a sort of cookie-cutter approach within your organizations. Your developers can just pick up an API spec or pick up a streaming solution, and they can use that for different parts of their business and really innovate really quickly. So I always like to think of a platform team as a platform enablement team. And this also then begs the question, well, how does the architect's role change? Because architects are important in organizations, and I've worked in organizations where architects have been the ones sitting in the ivory tower. And that's annoyed me incredibly with these sort of important architects who think they can tell you what to do. But actually, the job of the architect is not to be the smartest person in the room. The job of the architect is to make everybody else smarter. And they can have the roles of, maybe selecting some of the technologies and foster reuse of these standardized components. They can be involved in, enforcing the consistency, looking at changes with a bigger view, and looking at the long-term impact of any of the key decisions. So an architect's role is really important. It just can be different and can be enabling. And the whole point is, any platform you want to do internally as enablement needs to be a burden rather than a blessing. So, what is the future of serverless? Well, maybe to look at that, we actually should look at the past, because a lot of people think, well, the start of serverless must have been when Lambda was introduced sort of 8 years ago at reInvent. But it's interesting to realize that during the whole announcement, during the keynote, there wasn't a single mention of serverless. Yes, it did mention that there were no servers to manage, but actually serverless wasn't a term. And I like to think that actually the start of serverless started way before then, even when SQS and S3, anybody using SQS and S3? Tough crowd, nobody's going to put their hands up. Yes, somebody's using something over there. But if we look at these today, we think these are foundational serverless services. And these came way before Lambda, and in fact, way before EC2. And this isn't an AWS kind of thing. Some of the other big cloud providers started their traditional way, their traditional way of as a platform as a service. And they started with a platform as a service features where what you could do over the cloud, you could use services over the internet. And that was a serverless way literally from the beginning. And it was only years later that they, due to customer demand, they came out with the possibility to rent full VMs. This is years after they had released other features. So the whole serverless mindset and using things over the cloud is not just an AWS thing, but all cloud providers are doing this kind of thing. And so I'd like to say that the cloud was actually born serverless. And it's only becoming more serverless as time progresses. As more tasks are abstracted and ops tasks are more automated, improved. I haven't talked today much about Wardley mapping with the value flywheel effect Dave, Mark, and Mike's book really talks about. It shows how serverless is an inevitability. It's the inevitable evolution of the serverless provision and consumption. And it's only the beginning. There's still a whole bunch more to do. And one of the kind of things is code is a liability, and it's getting rid of a whole bunch of code that you're writing. And this allows you, when you're using the cloud and serverless, to build in the cloud and not just on the cloud with abstractions that make you do more. And this, with a serverless approach, you can build with using discrete components that you've built internally in your organization, rather than having to build the discrete components yourself. And I hope you've enjoyed your coffee at the back in the morning, but Serverless Espresso is an example of this. This is a coffee ordering app. We're going to be there all day, so please come and talk to us about serverless technologies. And we started with this as having a whole bunch of Lambda functions that did a whole bunch of code. You don't need to go into all details of this, but as we expanded the application, more code to write, more code to test, more code to do a bunch of things. And what we could actually do is pull all that code out and put it into a service called step functions, which does all the orchestration. And all of that is written as configuration code. That's going to be there forever. There are no runtimes to manage. There's no code to test or anything. And we can take a whole lot of that functionality and run it as a cloud-native service without a lot of code. Other examples as well, you're reading from DynamoDB with a Lambda function, a very common pattern to put to Event Bridge. Well, now with Amazon Event Bridge pipes, that's a native service integration. You no longer need to write your own code for that integration. So serverless is a reality. It's really not a fantasy. It's the fastest way to build applications with the lowest cost of ownership because you want to do things quickly and you want to accelerate your time to value. A serverless-first mindset allows you to focus on your business so you can give innovation to your customers and do what they really need. Really helps you with your operations, that you can do it sustainable, and you can help your organization do this with this, the guardrails and governance, and think of your platform enablement team to do this rather than building these big platforms. This allows you to code less. I know the code I write isn't perfect. I'm sure the code you'll write is perfect, so maybe it's not an issue for you, but coding less in the cloud, not just on it, is super useful. So to wrap up, serverless is the inevitable future, but luckily it's already here and we can all take advantage of it. Please come and talk to us on the booth today. There are a number of AWS people. We'll talk about anything to do with serverless, and you can get a free coffee out of it as well. Also, serverlessland.com, loads of information. It's our sort of one of our internal learning sites, and we've got huge amounts of code snippets you can reuse, and learning paths and videos and a whole bunch of stuff. One-stop landing shop for everything about serverless on AWS. Thank you for listening to me today. We've got a great day ahead. I'm just the beginning. Don't forget to talk to each other. You can get over the awkwardness, and thank you very much for joining.